Welcome back everyone. So today we're going to start sewing our cardigan. Now there's just a couple of things that I wanted to go over before we start sewing it. First off is I want you to also look at the instructions, the tutorial that you downloaded with your pattern. I'm not going to be doing exactly all the steps they have there because I'm going to be sewing on my overlocker. They do ask us to do some top stitching on the shoulders, and you can also on the band area go and do some top stitching as well. I'm not going to do it. I don't like the look of the top stitching on the specific fabric that I'm working with. It really just sinks so much into the fabric when I tested it that it doesn't look nice. I really don't like it. So I'm not going to be doing any top stitching. If you decide you're going to follow a bit of the instructions as well as when I'm taking you through the sewing, then I'm going to suggest if you do top stitching, remember top stitching is always a longer stitch length. So go to a longer stitch length. Otherwise, again, it just pulls into that fabric, and sometimes it can give us, because it sinks into knit fabric, it really doesn't give us that nicer finish all the time. So I think just test that for me as well. So mine, you will see when I'm sewing, I'm not going to be doing any top stitching. Now, as I mentioned, I will be sewing totally on my overlocker. The only thing that I'm going to do on my sewing machine is my pocket area, because we need to do edge stitching to get the pocket onto the cardigan. If you don't have an overlocker, or you don't feel confident enough to do the whole cardigan on your overlocker, then you're welcome to go and sew on your sewing machine and then maybe just do a 3-thread overlock stitch afterwards. Now I've got 4 threads on my overlocker because I need that left needle. The left needle is my safety stitch, which is going to give me that secure stitch that I would usually get if I'm sewing on my sewing machine. I have done a lot on overlocking on my YouTube channel, so I'm not going to go into detail on threading, differential, anything like that on the overlocker. I will put links at the bottom for you, and you can just go and look at my overlocker tips and techniques that I did share. All of that is in detail there. All you need to know is that we are working with a stretch fabric, so the differential, which is usually on 1 or normal, you've got to go slightly higher. Test it on your fabric, because if you are going to sew with a stretch fabric, you might get a slight wave, and we don't want that. So turn it maybe to 1.5 and test it also on the 2 differential to see what is going to give you a flat seam when you're sewing on the overlocker. Let's have a look at our sewing machine settings if you are going to work on your sewing machine. First off, you need a walking foot. I want you to go to a slightly lower tension for me. On our top tension, you're going to go to a longer stitch length. So if you usually work on a 2.5, you are going to go to a 3 stitch length for me. And if your machine allows it, or you've got that option on your machine, I want you to go to a lower foot pressure. Now first off, let's have a look what those settings are going to do. The settings, if I'm going to a lower pressure and a longer stitch, allows me, when I'm pulling my fabric, that stitch is just going to give a little bit with my fabric. If I don't do that, that stitch is going to be pulling very tight, and as soon as there's stress on that seam, my thread is going to break. So that is what I tend to do if I work with a straight stitch. Lower foot pressure is going to also help prevent a lot of stretch. Remember, the more the press of foot is pushing down on the fabric, the more it's actually going to stretch out my fabric for me, and we don't want a wave in our seams whatsoever. If you are sewing and you are going to get a wave in your fabric, just hold the steam above it, take your iron with the steam, hold above it, and then just take it away and just push down on that seam a little bit. So that is just going to bring the fabric back in for us. Then you've also got other options that they do mention in the instruction, or in their instructions or their tutorial. If you go and have a look, I think it's about page 13, they do mention that you can go and use your stretch stitch, double needle, all of those are mentioned there for you. You are also welcome to go try that. I want you to work on a scrap piece of fabric and see what is going to work best with your fabric that you're working with. Now, if you're going to do the zigzag stitch, if you don't have it automatically set into your machine, you are going to just take the zigzag stitch, go to a width of 1, and you're going to go to a stitch length of 2.5, and that will almost give you that little, it's like a little lightning stitch that it gives us. So that will give with the fabric again if we're pulling on the seam, but from the outside, if I look at my seam, it's going to look like a straight stitch that I've worked. So I'm going to say go look at those instructions, test their way, also test my way of how I set my machine in, see what's going to work best for you when you're going to be sewing. So our first step is going to be finishing our pocket so that we can go and sew it onto the front panel. Now you can see mine, I've already done one of them. The other one I will take you step by step, but there's that pocket piece done. And if you also look at my pocket, you can see it's lying nice and flat. We've got to be so careful when we are going to sew this pocket that I don't accidentally pull my pocket a little bit, because as soon as I pull any part of the fabric, then it's going to recover on itself, because remember, my maximum stretch is around the body, and I might find if the pocket is pulled that it's going to almost give me a bit of a pleat on this area over there. So we've got to have everything nice and smooth. So when we're going to place it as well, we're going to work on the table. Now let's start with our pocket pieces. So you're going to need your pattern piece 7, which was your pocket, and you're going to use your pattern piece number 8, which is the pocket band. Now the pocket band we're going to fold in half. There's my pocket band. We're going to fold in half and we are going to press it. I want you to please press as we go. Every seam we're going to sew, we're going to press. If there's a panel piece that's got to be folded, we're going to press it. Otherwise, we are not going to get that professional look. And at the end of the day, we all want it to be, we want our cardigan to look like it's coming out of a boutique. It mustn't be home, it mustn't look homemade, if I can put it that way. So when I'm pressing, I just wanted to chat to you about pressing with our knits. When we are pressing a knit, I don't want to stretch the fabric, so I'm not going to put my iron down as if I'm ironing and go and do that. I'm literally going to go and I'm pressing, I'm lifting, I'm pressing and I'm lifting. It is so easy to distort a stretch fabric if I'm doing this, and I'm pressing hard as well, because I'm actually stretching that whole edge over there. Now another thing that I also like to use, I've got a clapper. Now clappers in South Africa is really difficult to get hold of. So what I've done before I actually got this clapper, I had a blackboard cleaner, and it's your piece of wood and it's got that sponge at the bottom. So I just removed the sponge, I sanded that area, and I actually also use it as a clapper every now and then. But all I'm going to do now to get a nice crisp edge where I'm pressing, I'm going to press down, and remember we are using steam, and I want you to first test on a piece of fabric. I don't want you to burn your fabric, so please make sure that the heat of your iron is correct. So I am just going to go and I'm pressing down again. And what you will see, if I let my fabric hang even from that side, can you see it's not opening up? This has got such a crisp, flat edge that it's given me that I don't have it almost making a little bit of a round edge over there. So I do prefer working with my clapper. So you're going to press both of your bands for your pocket, and then we are going to take our pocket piece and we're going to pin this onto the pocket piece. Now please make sure if you've got a pattern that the direction of your pattern is correct. So, and also check yourself, because it's almost the same size lengthwise and widthwise. Please make sure that you've got your maximum stretch in the right direction as well. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to pin this together. One thing that you will notice, and they do mention this in the tutorial, is that if you look at the edges, the band is slightly smaller than what the pocket is. I'm just going to put it closer. Can you see on that area? We've got it slightly less than what that pocket edge will be. Look at that. So it's about, I would say about a centimeter that it's smaller. So in order now to place it correctly, I'm just going to go and I'm going to grab one of my pins here, and I'm just going to get a center point for myself, because we've got to stretch this band a little bit, and I just mark a pin where my center is over there. You can obviously just go and pull it as you are sewing, but I just want to show you this method as well so that we know we are working accurate. And then all we're going to do, I'm going to put the edges together and I'm going to pin that edge. I'm going to make sure, look at where my pins are. Can you see that difference over there? So all I'm going to do, and let's come a bit closer so you can see that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to pull that to that pin, and I'm just going to pin it down. And then I'm going to do this edge as well. So there we go. I'm going to be sewing all my seams on my overlocker. If you've set up your sewing machine, you can then go and work on your sewing machine and then decide to do the seam finish that you want to do. One thing that I do want to show as well is that I'm not stretching my fabric excessively. I'm just making sure that I'm holding where the pin is and I'm just flattening that area. When I'm getting to this edge, just making sure my edges are lining up. So I've got that area. Now we're going to go and press it. We've sewn the band onto the pocket piece now. Now if you worked on your sewing machine, you might find that this edge where you've sewn might have just stretched out a little bit. Now to bring back that stretch, all you have to do for me is really just go and put your steam over that sewing that you've done there. And as you're putting the heat on there, you can see I'm not touching the fabric. I'm really just holding the steam there. If I have to, I can even push the fabric in a little bit. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to go and make sure that with the heat brings back that stretch. You'll find it automatically just gets it flat for us. Now once you've done that, we are going to press our pattern piece, and I want you to press it. I've gone ahead and pressed a little bit already. I want this seam, the seam allowance edge to be to the bottom of our pattern. We are now going to go and press in the sides of our pocket and the bottom edge as well, so that we can go and pin it to the front panel and sew it onto our front panel. The instructions in your tutorial tells you to fold it in by 1 centimeter. So let's have a look what you can go and do for me. Now first off, you can use your measuring tape, you can use your sewing gauge, and then I've also got a hot iron ruler which has already got my centimeter markings for me. So I'm going to be using this when I'm working, but I just wanted to show you how you can also work with your measuring tape or even the seam gauge. So what I would do if I'm not using the hot iron ruler, I would go and set this at 1 centimeter because that is our seam allowance. So I've got it set at 1 centimeter. And then I put it onto my fabric and I fold the fabric over so that it lines up with the 1 centimeter. And I go and I take, and I'm just going to show you, my hand is in the way there, but I go and I place a pin into my ironing board. And can you see there, I'm going to place a little pin over there as well. Then I take it out and I go to the next section. For me, it's just so much easier. Instead of just pinning my fabric, it's just so much easier if I'm pinning it into my board. It's keeping it in place for me. So can you see again, I'm going to go and again we'll just go and pin that section in. I can move this out of the way. I just want to place this pin that way. I can go and now it keeps catching there. So I'm going to go and do the next 1 centimeter. So you can go and do it on your ironing board and you can go and press it now. Now with my hot iron ruler, I've already got my measurements. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to press this. I'm going to fold this so I know it's on the 1 centimeter. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to press it. And that just gives me the guide. So as I'm pushing it, I can just go and get exactly 1 centimeter. And then I'm going to move it up and I'm going to carry on with that. I just wanted to show you something again. Can you see once I've pressed that it still flips up a little bit? And that is why I like to use my clapper. I'm just going to show you the crisp edge that we can get. I'm just going to do it on this edge. Can you see how it stays flat where I've used my clapper, where this always wants to roll back? I want you to go and now press your 1 centimeter edges in on both of these sides. Once you've done the sides, you're going to bring it up from the bottom, your 1 centimeter, and you're going to press it for me. Our next step is now to place the pocket onto our front panel and to sew it. Now, I've got my tailor tack, so I know exactly where to line up my pocket piece. So all I'm going to do, I'm just going to line it up for now. But something that I do after I've sewn one of my pockets, and I've done it on this one, I love to double check and make sure that when I put my panel pieces together, that they are exactly the same measurement from the hem to the edge of my pocket. If I measure from my hem up to the edge, I've got 17 centimeters, and I can see there I've also got 17 centimeters. So I know now when I'm going to place my pocket, I want this one to also be 17 centimeters. So that's just something that I always do. I always double check myself. So even though I do have my tailor tacks and they should be accurate, I am going to double check and make sure that I do everything correct. And my one tailor tack just came out on that side. All right, I'm just going to put that in place, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to now measure and make sure that I've got 17, and there I can see I've also got 17. So my bottom tailor tacks are really spot on. So those are just checks that I do. I don't want to have my pocket on and then only once I wear it see that the one is slightly lower. It's so easy when we are busy working that just a small mistake can happen when we are doing our markings. Now what I'm going to do from there, I'm just going to go and I'm pinning my corners first. I don't want any movement. And I work on a flat table. I want my fabric to be flat. And I'm going to pin on that area. And then I will just go do a pin on these areas, and I'll do a pin there. Now, I'm not going to go immediately to my sewing machine and sew it, because we're working with a knit fabric. It's so easy that with the stretch, as soon as the presser foot goes over the fabric, that I can have a slight stretch, and then my pocket placement is going to, or the pocket where I've placed it is going to move. So I'm going to go now off camera, and I'm just going to do a hand basting stitch to keep it in place, and then I will start sewing my pocket to the front panel. If you go back to your tutorial, you'll see that when you are sewing the pocket, they are actually telling you to start from there and you go up at a slight angle across, and then you come down. And that is really just to keep this section so that it's tucked in nicely. Now, I'm not going to do it. I'm actually going to go and sew all the way around the pocket, and then I'll do that as a last step. I really don't want any movement, so I'm not going to be doing that. But you can go ahead and follow the instructions. They show you that direction. They tell you to sew from that corner. You're going to sew up slightly across, and then you come down. When you get to this area, you go across and you come down. Now, like I said, I'm just going to start from corner to corner for now. I will go do that as a last step. Another option also, instead of doing that, if you do have the bar tack on your sewing machine as well, you can even use a bar tack stitch as well. But let's go and sew this. Now, I've got my, let me just show you here. I've got my edge stitch foot on. On the Benina, it's the number 10 foot. It's got this little plate on there. So I'm going to use that to guide me so that I can sew straight. All I need to do is just move my needle position, and I'm going to move my needle position 2 spaces to the left, and because I want to be nice and close on the edge. I'm putting my dual foot on as well. That actually acts as my walking foot, and then I'm going to start sewing. Now, I don't start right on the edge if there's a bit of bulk on that area. I like to rather start a little bit in. I am going to have to reverse a little bit, but as soon as I start on that area, and I found that with some machines it might just jam the machine as well, so just be careful if you're going to start. As I said, I'm going to just go and do, just let me see where my needle is going to go, because I'm trying to stay out of the camera view, but I just want to see. I think I'm going to be fine over there. So let's just put the foot down. I'm just going to start from that section, and I will just do a couple of reverse stitches as well. Just want to make sure everything is lining up. And I'll just go reverse stitch. I'd actually want to just open my information. Let's reverse stitch. I'm just going to reverse stitch that little section over there. And now again, I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to sew all the way around. and you can see the edge of my pocket is on the edge of this little guiding plate that I have on my foot. Now do you have a look on your machines as well? You will have, even if it's a blind aim foot that you have, it's got a little bit of a plastic guide as well, which you can move with a screw, because some of the machines cannot move needle positions, but when you are moving that little plate, you can actually position it in the right position for you to get your edge stitching. So I'm going to carry on. I'm just going to go all the way around, so I just want you to go and sew the pocket on for me. We've finished sewing the pockets to our front panels now, so now we can start putting our cardigan together. Now when we sew with stretch fabrics and we've got our horizontal stretch, we have to stabilize this area, because as soon as I wear this and with all my movement, this area is going to stretch out, and I'm either going to find that eventually this is going to be totally off my shoulder point, it's going to be as if it's growing on my body. So we always want to make sure that we don't have any stretch on the shoulder area. Now when we stabilize it, I put my stabilizer on my back pattern piece on the shoulder, because I press the seam to the back, so it actually covers whatever stabilizing I'm going to be working with. Now in the instructions of the tutorial, they also give you information there, and they even tell you that you can work with a clear elastic. I don't work with clear elastic. I prefer either just using my stabilizing tapes. With this one that I have here, it is actually one that I always use with my overlocker. I used to sell this, but we cannot get stock anymore. The factory that used to make it actually closed. But if you don't have this, anything like any sort of tape, I would say even organza ribbon, as long as it's a narrow one. This one is really narrow. If I look at it, it's about 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters. So you can even go and work with a bit of organza ribbon. You can take your iron-on interfacing as well, and you can cut it in a little strip that you're going to press onto the back shoulder. Now this specific one, and I just want to grab it here, this specific one is called heat press stretchy soft hem tape. It comes in a black and a white. I actually sell this one in my online store, and I'm always using it. Because we are working with a narrow seam allowance, if I'm going to use this, I will cut it in half and I'll press it onto the wrong side of the back shoulder. But I'm going to show you my technique. I always go for this tape, and I'm actually going to sew this in while I'm overlocking. But first off, we've got a pin. So when we pin our shoulders together, we are going to put right sides together. So let me just grab my front panel. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to pin this. So I'll always line up so that I can see everything is perfectly lined up. And I will always pin on that point and on that point, and I'll give myself one pin in the center as well. As you can see, I don't pin a lot. As long as I know I'm controlling my fabric when I'm sewing, I don't need hundreds of pins on there. So I'm going to do this one as well. Now one thing that I do want to mention, I always mention it in all my classes as well. If we're looking at this side, can you see I'm really perfectly matched up on that area? But look what's happened on that area. The front panel piece on the shoulder is just slightly sticking out. Can you see that little area over there? That is fine. Don't try and stretch the back so that it's on the tip of that shoulder point. Remember, I've got to look where my seam allowance is going to be stitched. And if I look at that, that's where my seam allowance will be stitched. That is perfectly where my fabric actually matches up. So I can see it's matching up there. So please don't stretch this and try and get the points on top of each other, because then you are going to find when you open it, and I just want to show you. So now if I open this, can you see I've got a perfect flow from the back neck to the front. That little corner there will be matching where I'm going to sew. And I'm just going to put one more pin. So pin both of your shoulders. I'm just going to go through the steps again. I'm going to be sewing with my tape on my overlocker. Again, you can go and sew with any sort of stay tape. You can go and sew with a ribbon on that area. Just make sure it's narrow. Or you can go and you can either use a stabilizer, a fusible interfacing like this. If you don't have anything like this, you can just go to your stash and take your normal interfacing out and just go and cut a thin strip and then iron it on to the back shoulder. And remember, you're ironing it on the wrong side of the fabric so that we can go and sew this. And again, can you see that movement? We have to prevent that movement on the body when we're wearing the garment. I'm going to sew my shoulders now. Now with my overlocker, I've actually got an opening there where I can put the tape in. It actually just slides in on that area, and then the presser foot actually keeps my tape in place. Just have a look if you have anything like that on your overlocker. I know a lot of the newer overlockers now, they all actually do have a bit of an opening for us over there. If you don't have anything like that, what you're going to do is you will just have to look and just guide it next to the blade. You don't want to cut the tape at all. So I'm just going to lift my presser foot, and first off I'm just throwing my threads off that stitch finger. I'm just going to pull it back. And all these things that I'm doing now, I do have in detail videos on my YouTube channel, so you're always welcome to just go and have a look at those videos as well if you want to know more about working with your overlocker or working with knits as well. Now before I'm going to start sewing, I'm just going to do 1 or 2 stitches just to keep my tape in place. Now set your differential for me back to normal or 1. I don't want a higher differential. The tape is actually going to stabilize the fabric for me. And what I've also got to look at is how am I placing my fabric, because I want my tape to be on the back shoulder. Now usually when we sew, we will sew either from the neck point or the shoulder point, but because I'm doing the technique here where I'm sewing in the tape all in one go and I do want it on the back, I'm going to press the seam to the back, and then it's just going to be covering this tape for me, so it won't be noticeable at all. I'm just moving that out of the way so you can see. So I'm lifting my presser foot, everything is placed in position, and now all I'm going to do when I am sewing with my overlocker, again I'm just trimming a little bit, I'm keeping that out of the way, not stretching the fabric. If you're stretching the fabric while you're working on the tape, you are going to have a bigger shoulder seam than what you started with. So we've got to be very careful when we are working now on the shoulder so that we don't stretch our fabric. And all I'm doing, I'm just keeping this out of the way, and my hands are still guiding my fabric. And again, if you don't have this guide that you can use, just make sure that you're not cutting the tape. You will be watching the blade all the time. Now if you actually look at that, you can't even see that I have tape in there, and also notice there's no more stretch on the shoulder. So for me, that's actually stabilizing it perfectly for what I want when I work with knits. We're going to sew our sleeve now. Now one thing that I first wanted you to just notice for me, if you look at your sleeve pattern, you will see that you've got a notch, that little triangle on the top of the cap. That is indicating your shoulder seam, which will be where we're going to match it to our shoulder seam. And then you'll see on this side we've got 1 notch as well. They didn't go and add a notch on this area. Now this is just to indicate when we've got our 1 notch, that is usually for our front pattern. When we usually look at patterns, if there's 2 notches, that means it's our back. So this will be our front pattern piece. That is going to line up with our shoulder. So please make sure that these 2 markers are on your sleeve so that you can pin it correctly. Now I've already gone and I've sewn on one of my sleeves, and I just want to show you how we're going to do it. This is now the flat method, the flat sleeve method, where we actually open up our garment like that, and then we go and pin our sleeve and we sew the sleeve into the armhole. What we now do, can you see that area over there? We want to go and pin it and sew it in. So remember, right sides together. I've got my notch already on there, which is indicating it's got to line up with my shoulder seam, and that notch over there is indicating that it's for the front panel. So I'm just going to now pin my pattern pieces together. So all you have to do is put your shoulder seam where the notch is, and we're going to pin that, and then I'm trying to work flat on the table, so you can see usually I'll be working over my lap. But now take your underarm point. You are going to pin the underarm of the armhole, and you're going to pin the sleeve on those 2 points. And then I want you to take these 2 points as well, the underarm edges, and we're going to pin them together. So that is always my first step that I do, shoulders and at the underarm point. Now I don't stretch on this curve that you find there. I never stretch. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of a pin on that area, and then I can go from that point to where my pin is, and I can actually now start manipulating my fabric. I think I'm just going to first just give it a pin there. Also don't stretch too much where we've got this curve. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a pin there. And this area, can you see automatically now everything is falling into place. So now all I'm going to do is just, my fingers are really manipulating the fabric. And then just that last little bit there, can you see how I'm just pulling all the time? I'm so used to working that way, my fingers automatically does everything. So I've done a little bit more of pins on this area because of the curves that I do have. So let's do it on this side. Please make sure that if you did work on your overlocker and you sewed in tape and you went with your differential back to normal or to 1, that you just go to your higher setting again that you had when you tested your fabric. We don't want to stretch out excessively on this area, but I'm not going to be sewing in tape on this area because it's going to feel like it's pulling under my arm. When I also sew, I like to sew with my sleeve at the bottom so that my sleeve is on the feed dogs. And again, I've tested my fabric, so when I'm sewing this now, I know that I am just cutting off a little bit. If I am cutting off a little bit more than that millimeter, and I'm cutting off 2 millimeter, I'm not going to be stressed about that because I am working with a stretch fabric, so that's not going to be an issue. Make sure that when we are working with the curved areas, well, you want to feel all the time. I don't want the bottom fabric to create a fold. And can you see what's happened there when I took my pin out? I had movement, that cap started moving out from that edge. So all I'm going to do, I'm just pulling it back again. My hands are manipulating my fabric. So I want you to get into the habit when you are sewing that you actually just feel all the time. You maneuver the fabric. You've got to manipulate the fabric. Don't let it run away with you. So every now and then I do stop. I check my fabric, feel if there's anything, and then I carry on sewing. So that's what I want you to do. Manipulate your fabric. Make sure that these edges of your seam are always on top of each other. Don't leave it like that and think, okay, it's just a small piece, I'm going to cut it off. Somewhere along the line it's going to affect the fit. It's going to maybe give a little bit of a tuck or anything like that. So my hand is always at the bottom, and if I see it moving up, pull it back that little bit. So go ahead, finish sewing all the way around the sleeve for me. I've finished sewing my sleeves into the armhole now, and I've also gone and I've pressed it. Now when I pressed it, I actually pressed that seam allowance into the sleeve. When I hold it on my hand like that, this seam allowance there almost just forms like a little edge. Can you see that area there? Just like a little edge, so the sleeve will hang beautifully from that little edge over there. So that's just my thought behind it, why I pressed my seam allowance into the sleeve. And then I've also made sure when I sewed it that my seam allowance on the shoulder is also going to the back of the garment. Now we're going to sew our side seams and the sleeve all in one go. So I just wanted to show you as my garment is lying like this. So can you see that? So when we are going to be sewing it now, we are going to sew all in one go all the way around. Now I'm going to start sewing from the hem, purely because of the way that I pressed this seam allowance. I've pressed it into the sleeve, so I don't want it by accident at the bottom section to maybe fall down when I'm sewing from the sleeve hem all the way down. Right on the hem edge. So again, you'll see I always do one section over there, and then I'm just going to go and I'm going to pin under the arms, the underarm point. I'll go to my notches just now. So I'm going to press there. sorry, I'm going to pin there, and then I'm also going to pin at the sleeve hem. I'm going to pin over there, and then I start pinning in between. That is just my method of working, especially with my knits. Now I can see and I can maneuver it, and I'm just going to go midway again, and I'm going to pin there. And now I've got notches that I've marked on mine. You won't see it there, but I actually did mark it. So I'm just going to make sure that my notches will line up. So you're going to pin both of your sides for me, and we're going to sew it now all in one go. You're just going to pick it up from the bottom. You're going to sew all the way through, all the way up to that section over there, and then you're going to press the seams to the back for me. You should be up to this point by now. So we have put all our panel pieces together. We've also gone ahead and we've sewn the side seam and the sleeve all in one go. So we started at the hem, sewed it all the way through to the sleeve hem as well. Now, before we start doing the final touches, which is going to be sewing on the bands, I just want you to put the garment on, and I just want you to go and have a look at the length. Are you happy with the length that you've chosen? Remember, we're still going to put the band on as well, so it's going to be slightly longer. And I did the petite, I must mention I did the petite, so the length is correct. I'm just thinking for my build, do I rather want to go a little bit shorter? So I'm still contemplating what I'm going to be doing there. I think maybe this one I'm just going to leave as it is. If I do my second one, I will maybe do the classic length. But up to here, I'm pretty happy with it. It's looking beautiful. So all we've got to do now is really do the cuffs. We're going to do the band at the bottom and then also the neckband. So if I take all my goodies that I have here, let me just show you quickly. So this is the cuff that you're going to do for me. Now I'm using the long sleeve cuff, which was my pattern piece number 9. So you've just got to see which one was your cuff. And all you're going to do for me, because we cut it on the fold, all you're going to do is you are going to fold it, put your right sides together, and we are just going to go and sew a seam there and then press it flat for me. And then all we're going to do, we're actually going to just fold it in half. All right, so that is my cuff, which we will put on just now. So go prepare your cuff pieces for me. Again, I'm not sewing this on camera. It is really straightforward sewing. You're just folding it in half. Just make sure that you are folding it on the line over there for me. You don't want to do it wrong. So please make sure that you've got that the correct way. So do your cuffs for me. Sorry, all my stuff is on the table. This is my band that will be going on the bottom section. Now again, you are also going to take this and press it so that we've got this folded in half. I had to put a seam on mine on the center back because I just didn't have enough fabric to do the full band, but you actually don't notice it on my fabric because it's got that bit of a gray speckle to it, so you don't see that. But please make sure that when you are working with the band for the bottom, there was notches that you had to mark, and those notches we actually line up to the side seam, and we're going to pin that. So I'll take you just through the pinning, and then again just go and sew it. I'm just again working on my overlocker. I'm just going to do that seam on my overlocker. For the neck band that we have, you had to cut 2 on the fold. All you're going to do there for me is you're going to go and sew it together. Go and press them in half. There's also notch marks there. Make sure you've got the notches marked on the band. The notches line up on the neck point on my shoulder seam over there. So we've got to make sure we do that correct, because it is just slightly stretching on the curve on the back. But I will take you through the pinning of this as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm now going to pin the band onto my cardigan. Now, if you look at your pattern piece, you actually cut your pattern on the fold, and you've got notches on both sides of this band that you had to mark. Now, these notches is going to be lining up with your side seam. I've also gone ahead and marked my center back for myself, and that is also because I had to actually do a center back seam so that I know I'm going to match that up on that area as well. So I'm going to start with mine, and I'm going to pin my center seam that I've got there with my center back. Now I'm going to look for my notches, and I've got my notches over there, and that is for my side seam. So I'm going to put that onto the side seam. I'm going to pin that down as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to pin this area, and then let's do our other notch. So let's go there. Where's my notches? I've got my notch over there, and I'm just going to put it on the side seam, and I'm going to pin, and then I'll also make sure that I just pin the edge again on there, and then I will go and just give myself another pin just in between a couple of pins. I'm just going to go to my overlocker and I'm just going to sew this seam, and then I'm going to press it. Now when I'm going to press it, I just want to show you on this area. When I press mine, I'm actually going to press it so the seam goes upwards. So I'm going to press mine like that. So please go ahead, go sew your band onto the hem for me and make sure that you press. And then all we've got left is really to do our neckband on the center front and our cuffs. We're going to sew the neckband onto the cardigan now. I just want you to have a look. I just want to remind you about marking the neckband for me. Now, if you look at your pattern piece number 4, if you see where our fold marking is, now you will have a stipple line going down on that area. All I've done where my stipple line is, I've just done another stipple line across to the edges for me as well, because that is basically where I want you to go and mark on the cardigan, on the neckband. So that's where we're going to be lining it up on the shoulder seam. And we've got to make sure that we line it up perfectly, because the neckband is going to be slightly smaller than what my neck curve is going to be on the cardigan, because we've got to pull that band a little bit so that it actually pulls flat around the neck. If we're not going to actually pull that little area over there, the neckband can actually stand away from our neck and it's not going to give us a good finish. So I want to make sure that you are going to mark that for me. The next step as well, we've already pressed it. I've sewn my 2 bands together. The other step that I want you to do is to fold the right sides together. So I'm just going to fold my right sides together. I'm just going to give it 1 pin, and I want you to go and sew across this area for me. You're going to sew from the fold to the open edge for me. So all I'm going to do, and I'm going to sew it now so I can just show you what you're going to do, and we're going to do this on both edges of our neckband. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to place it down there. Remember, stay with your seam allowances. Because I don't want this section to unravel, I am going to, just on this area where the fold is, I'm actually going to tie this off. I don't want my overlocker stitch to be pulling open a little bit, but I'll do that just now. But what I want you to have a look, and you see we've closed it on that edge. I put my thumb in there, and I take the seam and I press it down with this finger, and I just turn it onto that finger. That way, can you see, without even any pressing, I've got a perfect square corner over there. Please don't go and cut on that tip for me. I know sometimes we see the videos and they tell us, okay, as soon as there's a corner, to reduce bulk, we've just got to go cut across. I don't want you to do that. It is really so straightforward. It's on the thumb. Hold it down, fold the seam for me with this finger. So can you see I'm folding it? Turn it onto that finger, and I'm actually pushing that corner out a little bit. And look at that, we've got that perfect square corner over there. So you're going to do it on both of the edges for me. Now when you're going to pin the neckband onto your cardigan, I want you to take the shoulders where you've sewn your seams, put the shoulder seams together, and just fold it for me like that, and just get the center back and put a pin in that area for me. I prefer always marking my center back, because that is just so much more accurate for me when I start pinning, because I do have a center seam as well, the center back seam on my neckband. Now all I'm going to do, I'm going to take my center back seam on the neckband, and where I've placed my pin, I'm just going to put one of my pins over there. Then I'm going to take my notch. I'm going to see where's my notches. I've got it there. And that notch, you're going to line up to this shoulder seam that we have there. So make sure it lines up on that area. And when you do that, you are going to see now that your neckband is smaller than what the curve on the neck is on your cardigan. If I've got to hold it like that, can you see I've got a little bit extra fabric? You can see that fold over there, so we've got a bit extra fabric there. Take on the other side. I'm also going to see there's my notch and my marking that I've done, and I'm going to go and also put it on the shoulder seam, and I'm going to pin on that area. Let's just pin there, because this area now, if you look at that, can you see that is a lot bigger there? When I am going to sew, I'm going to pull a neckband. I don't want you to pull the cardigan neckline. We are just going to, when we sew it, pull the neckband. The next step will be our bottom of our neckband, where we've already folded it under and we've seamed it. You are going to put it on the edge of our band. Let's do that. Sorry guys, it feels like I'm all thumbs when I'm trying to hold it up. I'm going to line it up exactly on that edge. We are going to go and also catch this area by hand. We don't want any movement on this edge when we start sewing. So that I'm going to definitely sew with some hand stitches so it stays in place. And as you look at my cardigan now, I can just go, as I'm hanging it, I'm just going to keep pinning. We've now come to the end of the sew along. As you can see, the cardigan is done. I must say I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I love the way it hangs on me. I also love the length, because I am going to be wearing it with my skinny jeans, so it covers the bum nicely, so I love that. At a stage, I wasn't sure if I would be putting cuffs on for myself, so the cuff I really think just makes the cardigan as well. I might play with the pattern a little bit. One other thing that I decided, and I'll put it on just now, I've just got a green top on, but I'll put it over the green top. One thing that I did decide that I want to go back and change on my pattern, because that is what sewing all about. You can go and change the patterns. I will definitely be scooping out under the arm. I find it just feels a little bit high under my arm for my body. So I might just go and drop it with about 1 centimeter, maybe 1.5 centimeters under the arm. So I'll just be scooping it out a little bit lower. And then I will add on a little bit onto my sleeve as well. So when I'm scooping out, I'm making that armhole a little bit longer, so that I can then on my sleeve, I haven't got the sleeve here, but then on the sleeve, I can just go, and on the sides where the seams are, I can just go and extend each side with 1 centimeter, and then just bring it back to the cuff area, to the hem area. I think that's all I'm going to change on mine. The rest I am really happy with. I'm going to quickly take this off and put it on just so you can see the fit on my body. So if I look at this, I made the long version, so it's just above the knee. I would say about 2 inches above my knee. I love the placement of the pockets, and I'm just going to turn so you can see. Look how beautifully it hugs around the neck area as well. Can you see there? It's nice and flat. So I actually think I'm going to be making quite a couple of these cardigans. As I said, the only thing, and this is my body, I just feel it's a little bit high under the arm for me, and because I've got a bit of excess, let's say a little bit of fluff under the arms, I would want my sleeve to be slightly wider as well. When I measured my sleeve initially, I thought, okay, with the knit, 2 centimeter ease will be enough, because that's what I had on the pattern without altering it. But I think I will want to have a little bit more, especially if it goes into maybe autumn and winter, and I want to wear a longer t-shirt maybe on it, a long sleeve t-shirt. So that is basically all I'm going to change, but I am really so happy if we look at this cardigan. Now, if you finish your cardigan, please go ahead and share photos with me. My email address is elsabe@schroeferdesigns.co.za. I would love to see what you've made, and let me know if there's any alterations that you think you will make on your pattern, or if you need any advice. So I'm looking forward to hear from you. But that is it for our sew along. You guys must have a lovely rest of the week and enjoy the rest of your sewing.